right, ladies and gentlemen, we're live. Welcome to the 12th, am I right on that? 12th episode of Reactionary Opinions. Is it our 12th? Oh, gosh, I don't know. I lose count. You know, when we've got so many episodes, you lose count, you know. It's good to know when you lose count. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 12th episode of Reactionary Opinions. We've got a fantastic show today for you guys. Before we get into the show, I have to do my tradition and present to you the meme of the week, which is going to get some Jimmy rustling going on over here for all the libertarians out there, lolbatarians, soybatarians, call them whatever you want. But this one already got a bit of ruffles and stuff. Got some Jimmys rustled on Facebook. It's the Stephen Crowder table, so it's the Change My Mind table.
I love it.
It says libertarians are just Republicans that smoke weed.
Change my mind.
Libertarians are just Republicans that smoke weed. Change my mind. I thought that was pretty darn funny. Wow,
it's half true. It's half true.
What's that noise? They're like a doorbell ringing in the background there, bro. Sounds like it. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, this week's show, we are going to be tackling a serious issue of the blind spots and intolerance of liberalism. So there's a disclaimer before we get into this. When we speak about liberalism and liberal, I must put this out over there. If we mention liberalism and liberal, it must be said that we are referring to the exact same thing, because liberalism, liberal, same thing. Okay, same as all the other ones under that umbrella. So that's the meme of the week out of the way. But before we get into that, boy, do we have a sponsor for you guys today. This week we've got an amazing sponsor. But before we get into that, here's a message from our sponsors.
Hello, this is Dr. Jerry Peterson, coming to you from an undisclosed location in the Yukon Territory on behalf of Reactionary Opinions, the most reactionary and based show on the African continent. Whoever is listening is no doubt familiar with my faggot cousin Jordan, who sold out to globalist interests for lollipops and tailored suits, while I've been carefully crafting my manifesto in private on how to deconstruct the New World Order. Jordan's going across the world with Dave Rubin, but I can't get a bloody show in a children's museum. Anyways, I've been thinking about very carefully how to overthrow those sodomite degenerates who practice sex magic at Bohemian Grove, run the Bilderberg Group, and employ global usury to subjugate the nations. Nations is not a right-wing word, it's just a word. I'm not a paranoid, radical right-wing lunatic who's skeptical of banks and the gay agenda because, well, I'm just bloody not. Anyways, keep listening to Reactionary Opinions, click like and subscribe, and clean your guns. Wow, that was great.
Wow.
I will say, getting Dr. Jerry Peterson on board was it was a bit of a task. Apparently, he's not as easy to reach as his cousin Jordan. He's kind of like the Unabomber. He's just sort of out in the middle of the woods, and he's worried about the globalists and all sorts of things. So I was proud of that one.
He's either like the Unabomber, or he's an Eastern Orthodox monk.
Yeah. Or both. I don't know. Wouldn't give me his real name.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the blind spots of intolerance and liberalism. Wow, what a deep topic. We're going down a serious rabbit hole over here this week. But before we get into that, let me explain to you guys how the flow of the show is going to be going down. We're going to first be talking about liberalism as an idea. Then we're going to touch on liberalism in reality. Boy, that doesn't work out too well at all. Then we're going to talk about liberal intolerance, and boy, is there a lot of it. There's a hell of a lot to talk about when it comes to that. And then we'll conclude it with some closing statements and all of those nice things. So let's get into this, guys. Liberalism as an idea. Dylan, you want to run us through that, what you've mentioned over here?
Yeah, sure. So liberalism as an idea is kind of the guiding light of pretty much all Western society these days in the United States, Canada, Europe, and to a large extent, even here in South Africa, and particularly with the DA, which isn't necessarily a good thing. But be that as it may, we have liberalism comes from the Enlightenment tradition. So or the Enlightenment era, rather. It's basically seeking to find a rationalist way to sort of define, codify human rights and liberty. So the word liberty is right there in the word liberal. They're connected together. So it's trying to come up with sort of a universal law, sort of a way that ethics function and the way that society should operate. And what makes it different than previous systems is that it's kind of it's based off a rationalistic sort of materialist framework.
Correct.
So whereas before, older traditions would be inspired by a religious system, or in traditional Christian society, divine revelation, in conjunction with existing traditions of the society that Christianity found itself in. So you may have a different expression of the what you might call civic order. So the way people and governments and institutions functioned would vary in Ireland compared to Byzantium. But they would, and in that regards, there'd be the cultural particularities. So the Irish have their own way of doing things. Byzantium has its own way of doing things. But at the same time, in terms of their morals and ethics and the basis on which they had certain laws and stuff, it was based largely on Christian principles. So basically what liberalism was designed to do was to have, X plus Y equals optimal outcomes. And where things got a little dicey with liberalism was defining what those optimal outcomes are. So in the past, again, like we were saying, you had inspiration from scripture sort of being the guiding light of how society should function, the writings of the church fathers and stuff. But then with the liberal tradition, you started getting a bit more abstract. So in the early part, you did have some people who were deists or Christians in some regards trying to cobble together liberalism. But then it became much more sort of that line of thinking, trying to rationalize ethics outside of divine revelation. You started getting some weird ideas like Jeremy Bentham with the moral calculus. So he's kind of one of these guys from the liberal tradition who tried to basically he's that you're somehow able to calculate in an almost mathematical way the moral good of a society and just go from there. So at the end of the day, what liberalism is it's a way to understand the world within a rationalist, non-theological framework in order to best structure society for prosperity and peace, ostensibly.
So a lot of rationalizing, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Disconnected from divine revelation.
Yeah, that's pretty much my understanding of the Enlightenment as well, as that it was like the final, almost like, okay, we've had divine revelation for centuries and centuries. Now we've kind of run our course there. Now we need to add on we need to go to the next level. And that is what the Enlightenment theory was supposed to have achieved. The next great leap forward type of thing in human development and thinking. That's that. And the problem with it was, for me, like I said, like I've always said, it never really had any sort of underpinning. They just you can if you look at where we are now, we can pretty much rationalize everything right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was also, I mean, Russell, I suppose it probably wasn't framed that way when it came out, but I suppose if you look at it, if you stand back now and you look at it, how it was, there's obviously a lot of sort of a big drive for sort of social justice as well back then, because obviously their main core belief is sort of liberty and sort of equality of opportunity and all of that. That ties in very, very strongly with some sort of social justice. Like it was, I suppose it was very, the motives and stuff were good.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I'm not actually even entirely sure that the motives were good. The Enlightenment, for me, when somebody mentions the Enlightenment, the very first thing that comes to my mind, the very first thing is the French Revolution. That was the epitome, the template for if you wanted to frame an event that epitomized the Enlightenment. For me, it's the French Revolution. Liberty, fraternity. What was it? Liberty, fraternity, equality.
Yeah.
Liberty, fraternity. Yeah. And the French Revolution, for me, I find absolutely a complete disaster in the human element. The French Revolution is the template for all revolutions since then. So,
I mean, the US was basically founded on liberty and equality as well.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the thing is that's the other thing. A lot of the Enlightenment liberals will look to the US and say that is because they happened more or less the same time, right, within 20 odd years of each other. So it was in the same period you had the American War of Independence and their constitutional development, etc., etc., and then you had the French Revolution on the other side of the Atlantic. And I suppose there is a viewpoint. No, well, look. The American way is the Enlightenment way, and we don't really know what the French Revolution was. People that want to excuse the idea of the Enlightenment and liberalism, but it's debatable which one is actually the true representation of liberalism.
Yeah, and the thing too to keep in mind with the French Revolution is that you had anti-monarchists who were both sort of Enlightenment characters, but you had the Jacobins, the radicals.
Correct, Jacobins, yeah, the radicals. Correct.
And then the other side, you had the Girondins, who were basically peers of the American founding fathers.
Yeah, another thing that's interesting about the French Revolution is that they seem to have a disdain for hierarchy and the natural order of things.
Yeah,
and that seemed to be the one of the weird elements that crept into their thinking. I don't know where exactly it came from. It doesn't seem very enlightened to not favor hierarchy.
I would assume it came from a hatred of monarchy, Russell.
Well, it came from some hatred somewhere. I don't know. I'm not an expert on this area, but
the whole idea behind the removal of the monarchy was that everyone can be king.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, I actually think what happened, like with all these things, I think there was an uprising, just a popular revolt. I mean, revolts had happened previously throughout the centuries against kings and monarchs and everything, all right? And that was nothing new. But what happened this time is that, and it always happened, it happened in the Russian Revolution as well, is that these revolutions or these revolts actually get hijacked and taken over for a different outcome than what was originally started. So there'd always been revolts against monarchs, but things always settled down back into their groove again. But these Jacobins and co somehow managed to hijack the whole thing and turn it into an absolute disaster.
Yeah. Well, I think it was their narrative of equality, because they could then tell the average sort of peasant on the street that you could potentially be the king of the world.
No, you can be your own master.
You can be your own master, exactly. So,
The interesting thing too about some of the writings of these guys, like because you do find some things that are admirable within liberalism, but there's always this kind of, it's sort of removed sort of from theology. So for example, like Thomas Hobbes, the guy who wrote Leviathan, he had some good points in there. He did highlight sort of the right of the individual, but then he also talked about the natural equality of all men. So, I mean, if you mean in terms of, rights or before the law and sort of an idea.
Or human worth.
Yeah, but I even sort of contest that, I mean, all souls are equal before God. Yeah, but I mean, you can't. So in a theological framework, yeah, I could agree with that. But within the natural world, that's just absurd to me.
Yeah. Well, look, you see, the thing is, a lot of this liberal thought, particularly on the French Revolution side, they fail to take cognizance of the fact of this little thing called natural law, which had been established already for centuries. Legal frameworks had already been since Thomas Aquinas had already been operating in natural law already, and liberalism wanted to actually turn that in on its head, turn everything on its head. Throw out natural law. There
were quite a few liberals. One of the few liberal founding fathers that were about natural law. Actually, Thomas Hobbes was actually one of them, because he actually believed very, very strongly in his what he called the social contract and stuff. So he believed that it's what we talk about as well, that people are willing to give up certain freedoms for securities and stuff. So,
I'm speaking specifically
kind of
thing. Look, like I said previously, when you mention liberalism, I'm talking specifically about the Jacobin influenced French Revolution, about how it wanted to turn everything upside on its head, cast off all restraint, cast off natural law. We're going to rewrite the books of law. We're going to rewrite this. We're going to turn everything upside down. That is actually the template of liberalism that we're headed to today.
Heresy.
Yeah, well, look. I mean, the thing is, it's debatable. People claim no, liberalism was the American Revolution. I would actually say the liberalism that we are experiencing today, and the liberalism that's playing itself out today, is more in line with the French Revolution than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And the thing too to keep in mind is that even from the beginning, there's always been this sort of antagonistic relationship between liberalism and Christianity. So Thomas Hobbes, in his own day, who's kind of set the groundwork for a lot of liberalism, he was actually accused multiple times by his contemporaries of atheism.
Yeah.
I don't know if he ever came out and said it, because that might have been a little put him into disrepute at the time, but he did take positions publicly that strongly disagreed with church teachings. For instance, he argued that there are no sort of incorporeal substances, and that all things, including human thought and God and heaven and hell, are basically matter in motion. So it's a really kind of bizarre sort of materialistic, almost like monism, sort of what you'd find in like Plato or something, where everything is just sort of like this one weird blend. And so it's already from the very beginning, it's very kind of anti-traditional in regards to it.
There's also a lot of assumptions made with liberalism, which I think are false, which is the natural goodness of man. That's a big assumption that they make as well.
Yeah, the idea that man upon his own free will make the right decision eventually, or it's ridiculous time. You know, that is absolutely preposterous.
Yeah.
There were pessimistic liberals, and then there were optimistic liberals. So your more sort of pessimistic liberals were the ones that were sort of anti-natural goodness, and your optimistic liberals, which were more than likely your sort of French Revolution kind of liberals.
Your optimistic liberals would have been your what's his name?
Rousseau.
Yeah, and then on the American side would have been Benjamin Franklin and those sort of guys.
Yeah, and another Thomas Hobbes too was. I don't know if you guys familiar with his book Leviathan, but basically the whole idea with that it was sort of a pessimistic view of. On the one hand, it was kind of, talking about the equality of humans and stuff, but on the other hand, we had to sort of cede over our rights to a sovereign because it was that famous line, life in the natural order is nasty, cold, brutish, and short, or something like that. Because so he had kind of a more realistic view of what man was. But again, his argumentation is kind of devoid of any theological substance and disconnected from divine revelation. So he was kind of revolutionary in that regard for his time.
I think another special mention would obviously be John Locke as well.
Yeah.
Also another British philosopher, which is actually it's actually known as the father of liberalism.
Yeah. He was actually a book, if I'm not mistaken, that I read about. He was the one that kind of allowed for his works basically opened the door for people to enter into greater apostasy. If I remember correctly, I stand corrected, but I think there were also more on the American side. I think, what was his name? John Adams,
John Adams, yes.
John Adams was a lot more conservative and theological in his framework of thinking, I think.
Some of these other people like Thomas Jefferson. It's a well-known fact that while most of the founding fathers were kind of Christian in their day, a lot of the influential ones were of questionable.
Guys like Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. Those very influential ones were. Only one that comes to mind that might not have been like that is John Adams.
Yeah. No, there was a lot of deism was popular in that time. And one of the other sort of thinkers of the time that I think has to be hit on, and he's sort of one of these guys where you really start to see how liberalism can kind of go off the rails, was Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Oh, geez, that guy.
So, his whole idea. Yeah, so he eventually became a deist as well, I believe. So, which was pretty common for Enlightenment thinkers. But ultimately, he's the guy who sort of came up with the idea of the social contract. And it was also a lot of very vague language, and how basically it was bizarre. He like, man in a state of nature is like in this blissful existence.
Yeah, the noble savage.
Yeah, the noble savage idea of humanity. And
he was also the one that one of his favorite pastimes was peeing in public. I kid you not. That was one of his most famous things. He also fathered his family life was absolutely debauchery. I mean, I think he completely didn't acknowledge one of his children or something as his own, or I can't remember the whole thing. It's quite hectic.
Yeah, he definitely didn't win Dad of the Year award, that's for sure.
No.
And, the other thing too is I just got derailed. But yeah, so he was the guy. He kind of pioneered the social contract. Oh yes, I know where I was going. The other leg was that humanity is sort of fundamentally good, and we have sort of a childlike nature. But then the moment you include property, which is necessary for civilization, then everything becomes evil and humans get corrupted. But at the same time, that's sort of how, we sort of become self-actualized in civilization.
That's how we progress. It's called progress.
Yeah, I know. So from Rousseau's view, the very idea of human progress necessitates like this.
That's why he actually said the complete savage is the ultimate human.
Mm-hmm.
So for him, the untouched, untainted Aboriginal in Australia, for instance, or the is the most perfect human being.
Yeah. And the other thing, too, is eventually he got to the point with his philosophy that humanity would, or society you should have sort of the general, the sort of equality, sort of based society. But then, oddly enough, on top of that, you empower an almost all-powerful despot to execute what is known as, quote, the general will, which is never explained or whatever.
Well, that's what they're saying. The people will share the wealth. Yes. The people, that's where it comes from.
I am here to execute the will of the people, whatever. The general will, which is never explained. So in Rousseau, I think you see a lot more of the that malevolent streak of liberalism, which comes out in the French Revolution and communism, frankly.
Yeah, correct. Well, I mean, the French Revolution,
no communism.
Yeah, the French Revolution is the template for all communist revolutions.
Yeah,
it's communism light.
Yeah. No, that's communism pure. Yeah. Is the French Revolution?
Pure. It's distilled communism.
Yeah. So you want to
go in its purest form?
Yeah. So you guys want to go on to liberalism in reality now?
Yes, let's do liberalism in reality.
Yeah. So basically, the way liberalism in reality works is, we've touched on it before. The problem with liberalism ultimately is sort of its presuppositions and the foundation it's built upon. So, as we said, you were able to have very stable, long-lasting, flourishing Christian societies for centuries. For well over a millennia before, and they operated typically under almost all under monarchies, and with an explicit religious ethos as sort of the fundamental part of society. Liberalism departs from that, and so it's kind of a revolutionary way of thinking from the outset, trying to reason out ethics from a materialistic point of view, as liberalism does, is a big friggin' problem. So it's sort of saying, morals, we can just sort of just reason them out of existence. But and I'm sure we'll probably touch on this at some point in another episode. But there's a lot of problems when you try to make an ethical system apart from God, and I just don't think it can work. And you're kind of, and that's part of the reason why you see the continual shifting goalposts of liberal societies over the centuries, and acceleratingly even in a short span of years. What was once hallowed and time-honored tradition and ethical principle is now racist, or it's whatever it is. It's backward in some way and benighted.
Yeah. Correct.
And the other thing too is that a lot of the liberal principles, they sort of existed before. So things that we would consider to be liberal values, property rights, rule of law, contract law, juries, things like that had existed for centuries, before. So liberalism was kind of more of a, it was a departure. It was a foreign way of thinking.
So, essentially, it didn't just left things change. TV's a bit loud. Are you back, bro?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, so for me, I think that it's true what Dylan's saying over here with liberalism does become materialistic, but you know what? They gave us the Industrial Revolution.
No,
Yeah,
that's
it's absolutely.
They gave us the Industrial Revolution, Russell. How dare you say that's nonsense?
Man, you can't pin the Industrial Revolution on the Enlightenment. They can't claim that.
Well, I think
There's nothing. There's no ways they can claim that.
Drew, not on the Enlightenment, on liberalism.
Well, okay, on liberalism,
free trade, free
the same, man.
That's nonsense. Industrial Revolution was just about a couple of guys that actually invented tangible things that increased people's production, and now created a middle class. I don't know how exactly the property rights always existed before that, like Dylan said. I don't know how exactly liberals can claim that.
I think there's inherently a difference in liberalism and liberal values, I guess. So if there's liberal values and those liberal values exist, then I don't know what I think Dylan wrote something over here, right? And he's sorry to ruin your closing notes of it, but liberalism doesn't have a monopoly on liberal values.
In quotes.
In quotes. But
so a lot of things that are considered to be liberal values, kind of like what Russell was talking about, like property rights, rule of law, contracts. Those aren't necessarily liberal ideas. I mean, they've existed for centuries across, different civilizations and epochs.
Yeah, another thing quickly we just need to mention, just briefly, is that the reason why they call that period the Enlightenment was because people often refer to the centuries before that, which are correctly referred to as the Middle Ages, that people refer to in common language as the Dark Ages. There was nothing dark about the Dark Age, so-called Dark Ages. It's the Middle Ages.
Yeah,
that's what it is. It's not. It wasn't dark like they say it was.
No.
Just a side note.
There were many scientific advancements made, many universities opened, all of this sort of thing. Many medical advances made, and they were every single one of them were church sanctioned. And there was out of the whole, what I find so strange, and this is a good point that you mentioned, Russell, is that the start of liberalism, so anti-monarchy, anti-traditionalism, anti-all of that sort of thing, claiming the rights to liberal values and freedoms and that sort of thing, all of that, and them calling it the Enlightenment and all of that. I find it so. They even claim that because of the Enlightenment, the scientific method was created and all of that, which is utter horseshit as well, because before the Enlightenment, so the Dark Ages is framed as these dark times and all of that, but there were so many universities and church organizations that were founded, and actually the scientific method was actually created and founded by the church or Christian organizations.
Yeah, modern economics actually has its roots in monks from the Salamanca in Spain in the 1500s, actually. So it's, it's not an Enlightenment product in root. It sort of had its origins long before that.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, also a lot of people think that, or that when you hear the Enlightenment, they think that's when church advancement just stopped and science took over. You know what I mean? Yeah. Which is also pure horseshit as well.
Yeah. No, you definitely saw a lot of marvelous advances in science, in philosophy, in mathematics, all before the Enlightenment. So the Greeks, you know, I mean, who wants to? Does anyone want to forget about those guys? I mean, the idea that you needed the Enlightenment in order to progress society is absurd. To a certain extent, yeah, you know, it may have accelerated things, but to assume we'd never get there is, I think, far-fetched. It's sort of like saying, you know, the world, we needed World War I to get rid of all the monarchs and stuff in order to be where we are today. Well, we have no idea what, you know, a Germany under the Kaiser would look like now, you know, because they were never given a chance.
Well, look, I mean, the thing is, if the Enlightenment had given us the wheel and the written languages or something, you know, something major, but I mean, the thing is, they didn't give us actually anything that wasn't already progressing just fine already. You know what I mean? If you look at if you just happen to look through the how things were being uncovered and the passage of time, how things were progressing, I don't see anything amazing about the Enlightenment.
Oh, but Russell, it brought us out of the Dark Ages. After the Renaissance and the Dark Ages, Russell. I mean, it's
like golden ages, more like.
It's interesting. It's interesting that pre this Enlightenment, things like the printing press and that sort of thing were invented. Now the printing press, there's something. Now there wouldn't have been anything without the printing press, and the printing press was pre-Enlightenment.
Yeah, it was the Gutenberg.
I mean, what would the Western world have been without the mass printing press?
Well, the printing press was an industrial revolution on its own.
Well, exactly. Back then, I mean, what is it, the 1500s or something, eh?
Yeah, definitely before the Enlightenment.
Definitely before the Enlightenment. And there probably wouldn't have been an Enlightenment if there wasn't for the printing press.
Yeah, probably not. Well, so there'd be almost no way to disseminate.
Russell, we spoke about this on Saturday briefly, Russell, when we met and stuff. But a lot of out of all the so-called heresies of the church, because apparently a lot of people were like, you know, the church was burning people at the stake for being scientists, and they called them, you know, look at these magicians, they're making science, burn them, you know. But if you look through history and stuff, there's literally only one case of the church sort of deeming someone a heretic, and that was Galileo. It's the only person.
But even that's actually exaggerated as well.
Exactly.
I mean, Galileo, I think he was having a tiff with his contemporaries.
Yeah,
and basically his contemporaries got the church to shut him down.
Yeah.
So why if the church was after all these scientific heretics and stuff, why did they have observatories built, universities built? Why are they just trying to like attract the heretics? You know, come all ye heretics to our here observatories so we can find you out and burn you. Never happened.
And as Russell said, I'll just make this really brief, but the thing with Galileo was essentially Galileo published his ideas. People were like, that's a really neat idea, Galileo. That's cool. But the problem with what Galileo did is then he said, and anyone who disagrees with this is an idiot, which would include all, you know, like clergy and stuff who hold to these ideas. So basically they just, they put him in there not because of his, you know, he had ideas, it was because he was an asshole. Now you may say, okay, it was a little heavy-handed, but still they didn't put him, the core argument that they put him away for his ideas is not correct. So anyways, and this is kind of where this getting back onto liberalism, the part of the problem with liberalism, ever since we've seen it sort of take root in the Western world, you know, these societies, they progressed fine for a time. And I think a large reason of that is the elite had liberal ideas, but the larger society didn't. You know what I mean? So in the same way that you see transgenderism and stuff being pushed on the public at large, most people don't particularly buy it. They may in another 20 years, but we're already starting to see pushback because people fundamentally are fairly reasonable and they don't particularly like a lot of these more wacky ideas that come down the pike. So liberalism inevitably eats itself, and it leads to sort of the second part of liberalism, the intolerance, the inherent intolerance of liberalism.
Yeah. So we're talking about tolerance.
Yeah. So for people who haven't seen the finale of Game of Thrones, what ends up happening is, in a nutshell, is Khaleesi, who's all about saving the people and stuff. She ends up wanting to embark on a global murder crusade to liberate the world. And I'm like, it's just like liberalism.
No, that's it. She tore that straight out of the Jacobins handbook.
Yeah. Yeah. So, except instead of a guillotine, she had a dragon. So
well, this is interesting.
So I'd say liberalism essentially, like Dylan said, part 2 of liberalism is essentially when the slope gets a little bit too slippery and they stray very far away from their founding principles, even though perhaps their founding principles might not have been too savory, but they sort of stray far away from where they are because, absolute freedom or too much freedom and stuff. And, to all you libertarians out there.
Another interesting thing about liberalism in reality is that the reason why it becomes tyrannical is because people it's got this kind of thing with it where people almost become too clever. They kind of become so wise in their own eyes, become so, let's put it bluntly, they see themselves as overly enlightened and everybody else as dumb idiots. Yeah. All right. And eventually what happens is it's like the emperor, it's the same sort of thing as, the emperor has no clothes type of thing. It eventually gets to that, Yeah. People deceive themselves with their own wise craftiness.
Well, we can see that happening with the woke patrol nowadays, Russell. It's the exact same thing.
Yeah, people always overrate themselves. These individuals, they always seem to, I don't know, they because they've got no underpinning in through revelation or anything like that. There's very little humility.
Yeah,
which keeps them grounded and not going off the rails.
Yeah, well, Russell, humility. What humility is viewed as by liberals is a restriction on your freedoms.
Yeah, well, they would see it that way. That's why it can't. That's why it's not sustainable.
But this is the whole thing: is it's not sustainable, and liberals and libertarians and stuff will argue with me. But I say this: too much freedom leads to degeneracy. It just does.
Well, I think not too much freedom. With the mindset of don't worry, we're very clever, we know everything, and then we'll just give people, we'll just open the floodgates to any little freedom that exists because we so clever, we know we've got it all figured out.
Sure, well there are certain freedoms that are destructive to natural law, Russell, and all of that. So you can't have. There are certain things that natural law doesn't allow for. And if you say things like, "Oh, natural law doesn't allow for it," then that's a restriction on your freedoms and your liberties.
Well, this is the thing. You see, the people. That's where they've gone too far. They've now devised in their own mind all sorts of inventive ways to rationalize their way past any question.
Russell hates that word, eh?
Yeah, and it's sort of, as you were talking about, Russell, I got a apt verse here, which is from Corinthians, and it's the foolishness of, or the wisdom of the world is foolishness in God's eyes, right? So by people trying to reinvent the wheel and reconstruct the whole social order, they're not low IQ people, but what is wisdom to them is actually, in the end, destruction.
There's a similar verse in Romans as well, where it says, thinking they're wise, they became entangled in their own thinking. It's in Romans as well.
Yeah.
Where they've got that the same sort of verse, same sort of thing it's saying.
Yeah, and the intolerance of
why are you quoting fairy tales, guys?
Dude, it's real.
Quoting Bibles, verses and stuff for liberals is like water off a duck's back. They're way past that. They're on the edge of the cliff, bro. Their moral compass is
and that's the whole point.
They've already rationalized it away.
It's constantly changing.
They're rationalizing everything.
That's exactly what they've done. Is they've rationalized everything away. That it's just their core thing. Like I've over the last couple of days and stuff. I've done a bit of reading up and stuff. But the main thing the main shortfall of liberalism is absolute freedom. That's their sort of center plank. Is freedom and absolute freedom. So the freedom of everything, the freedom of expression, the freedom of all of this, and that is just it's counter natural law. And we've spoken about this on our very first episode about freedom of speech. It's just not sustainable.
Yeah. So there's here's
that verse. I was right. Romans 1:22. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into the... let me just see the version here. Professing where they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man, and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. That's idolatry. But in the first thing there, for an image in the form of corruptible man.
Yep.
Here we go.
That's the whole thing. Eventually, all these ideas, it becomes idolatry of a different kind,
Correct.
Instead, now they're worshiping their own intellect.
Yep.
So the intolerance of liberalism, I see sort of as a two-pronged approach. On the first, you have the sort of cultural aspect domestically, and then inevitably what that starts to do is it starts to branch out internationally, which is what you see a lot with these sanctions and stuff that are being imposed on illiberal countries. So the current thrust of, ever more social justice, so-called, in the culture wars is just kind of the logical conclusion of liberalism. There's no end to it. I mean, the things that you see today would have been thought of as impossibilities, 20 years ago, in terms of what's permissible within society, and this massive push for transgenderism as a perfectly acceptable, healthy lifestyle. Cultural Marxism's taken root to where categories don't exist, and yet they do. And if you claim that they, by their own logic, that it doesn't, you get criticized as a hater. So it's out of control. It's sort of what it is.
That word is loved. You're a hater.
Yeah.
That's liberty and equality. That's liberalism.
And the interesting thing too is a lot of this cultural Marxism, as it's termed, you really don't see outside of liberal countries, even in countries that were on the far left in terms of having a distributivist sort of communist socialist policy. So a lot of the Eastern countries, which had more authoritarian or communistic regimes, we would consider them rightfully to be on the left in certain regards. But they lacked that sort of cultural component where they wanted to, they did want sort of the new socialist man and stuff, but they were much more explicitly hierarchical, sort of oppressive societies, and people knew it. So one of the interesting sort of cases of this is that in 1917, the USSR decriminalized homosexuality. But then in 1933, they criminalized it again, very, very quickly afterwards. And the State Duma, which is sort of like the lower house of the legislature in Russia, in 2016 proposed a bill where it would fine and arrest public displays of homosexuality. And the party that actually proposed it was the Russian Communist Party. So,
No shit, yeah.
yeah, I'm not even kidding. So even so this idea that in Western societies, the left is much more culturally active than economically active. In Russia, they were never, ever really concerned with this sort of crazed sexual liberation and stuff. Might have been on paper at some point, but it never took, and they never pushed it to the same degree that they do in the West.
Yeah, look, the thing about Russian homosexuality question in the Soviet Union and Russia, it's quite strange. They've waxed and waned quite a bit over the last 100-odd years in that regard. 1 minute it's this, next minute it's that. Yeah. They have moved. They've waxed and waned on that issue. It's a bit strange, but anyway, it's one of those peculiar things.
Mm-hmm. No, and I just thought it was sort of funny, illustrative, because here you have a radical leftist movement, right? The Communist Party in Russia, but they're absolutely not liberal in certain regards. You know what I mean? So they're like, this is just bourgeois degeneracy, which satiates the masses and keeps them, distracted from the real prize, which is collective thinking. You're buying them off with sodomy, So I'm not kidding. They declared it. The reason why they made it illegal again was because they deemed it to be bourgeois degeneracy, and it's sort of seriously. They're like, you keep the people entertained with sodomy, and then they'll be too their balls will be drained, and they won't be able to collectivize.
Yeah, all sorts of things.
Yeah, literally. But where I'm really sort of interested, where you see this stuff happening, is in the corporate sphere. So the corporate world has sort of bitten this off and swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. So I don't know if you guys recently saw this campaign that Target had, where they were like in the kids section. It was something to do with like it was basically LGBT apparel for kids and stuff. And it's just sort of the length to which this is just pushed in society, particularly at the corporate level, is shocking. And I think it's all eventually sort of about control.
Yeah, I saw there was a Babylon Bee article about it says thousands of international corporates gang together to support a popular belief or whatever, and it has them all with like branded stuff like Pepsi can with a rainbow on it, and Adidas rainbow shoes and all of that, like as if because there's still people out there that think that being pro gay or pro LGBT or whatever is an unpopular opinion. I'm like, what? It's like the it's like the normal thing now. Like it's like the most popular opinion. You can't. We live in such a liberal society, freedom of expression, freedom of this, freedom of that. Surely folks can come out and say, well, I don't like it. But you can't, especially not in a corporate environment.
No, absolutely not. And that's the thing. That's the thing too. Is this is when liberalism it's a jealous god. Liberalism is a jealous god. So
no doubt about it.
When you see, you started seeing this in the civil rights movement in the United States a lot, where afterwards, yes, it was absolutely a good thing to sort of crack down on some of the oppression that was going on, but the parts of the Civil Rights Act that basically outlawed essentially free associations, so for businesses not being able to discriminate and stuff, they're like, this is illiberal behavior and it shouldn't be tolerated. You know, so it was, and that's sort of where you started seeing it creep in, and now you're starting to see ever more outrageous impositions on sort of traditional society. So one of the things that was recently passed is in California, it is now basically legal to give somebody else AIDS because I'm not kidding. They decriminalized. So now in California, you can't sue somebody for damages if you end up getting AIDS from them, whereas in the past you could. The simple reason being is that it's homophobic and stigmatizes, you know, the gay lifestyle and stuff. So, and then you end up seeing this sort of exported abroad. Now, of course, there's big sort of grand chessboard stuff going on, you know, control of resources and whatnot. But the way that they try and drum up public, what would you call it, public sentiment and get public support for these basically corporate interests abroad, these wars, is they play to their liberal values and presuppositions. So
wait, Dylan, wait. Rather give someone a life or a death sentence than have gays and LGBT people get stigmatized. Geez, that's disgusting.
Yeah. No, I mean it's outrageous.
This is liberal degeneracy right in front of us at play.
Yeah. No, and so that's just sort of and it's in California, but it's, you know, California is an interesting place to sort of see where the rest of the country will be in, you know, 30 years or whatever. But so part of the reason that they're able to drum up popular support for wars is liberalism is so embedded and infected kind of the culture at large. They'll say, oh, you know, these people, they are prejudiced against gays, so we need sanctions. Or these people, you know, they don't treat their women right, so we need to bomb them back to the Stone Age and then steal all their oil or whatever. So they always come at you with the liberal propaganda to get the public buy-in, and then they carry out their real purposes sort of behind closed doors.
Just sickening. Just sickening. And it's also all about feelings as well.
Yeah, because it is. They really play on the feelings.
Because humans are, you know, emotional people and stuff, and emotions and feelings and stuff drive us. So they appeal to those things, and that's how they take the narrative.
Yeah, but it's easy. It's dangerous. It's easy, and it's also very dangerous to weaponize feelings.
Mm-hmm. But that's how they do it. And, you know, and Woodrow Wilson, in order to get the United States involved in the First World War, he really played to, you know, the feelings, manipulated them of the public after the sinking of the Lusitania. And his whole shtick was make the world safe for democracy. You know, we can't have these powerful anti-liberal empires and nations at large in the world because, you know, that just doesn't fit with our vision at the end of the day.
Do you think liberals are perhaps trying to sort of rationalize feelings or sort of frame feelings as rational behavior? I don't know, or rational reasons to do things. I don't know. Perhaps that's how it's framed.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think for some of them, they have the values, and then they reason backwards. For other ones, I think it's just kind of the logical sort of consistent flow. So some people who are atheistic are attracted to liberalism because the end goal is basically a kind of unbridled lifestyle where the individual, you know, there shouldn't be any constraints on me because there's no basically higher moral order. So it's a bit of both, I think, depending on who you're talking to.
So I think, I think that liberalism is a slippery slope. I don't think that it is sustainable.
Mm-mm.
No, it's gonna turn in on itself.
Yeah,
Definitely is. And there's many things framed under liberalism as well. but we won't get into that right now. Um, so, do you guys want to go into the conclusion?
Yeah, we can spend some time there.
It's like Dylan's first little point over there is that liberalism doesn't have a monopoly on liberal values. Close quotes.
Yeah. So that's just sort of what we're talking about before, with a lot of the things that liberals say, oh, no liberalism, then no basically wealth or prosperity. I mean, that's not true. I mean, like we'd mentioned a couple times before, property rights, rule of law, clear-cut contracts, being able to trade and stuff. These are things that existed long before liberalism was even an idea. So to claim that these aspects of liberal values wouldn't be there without all the other baggage is just, I just don't see how that's true.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, look, to be honest with you, this liberalism has done a lot of good things. I mean, okay, no, they brought us democracy. No, they haven't really done much good. But anyway, they've done a few good things and all of that. So, but they just because of their inherent beliefs and the way that they value liberty and equality over everything else, just I don't know. It's just not sustainable.
Yeah. I think, I guess sort of my closing remark would be just, ultimately liberalism is just kind of a universalizing force that always seems to get to the point where it tries to make the world around it conform to the ideology. So it doesn't, that little line I said before, liberalism is a jealous God. It really is. So where you see, international campaigns to sort of remake the world and stuff, they're invariably liberal. They're not traditionalist. They're not, religious. It's liberalism. It always is. It's progressivism, on the march.
Yeah, progressivism.
I'd like to just add on to what Dylan said there. If you look at liberalism versus the traditional Christendom, which most of the West came out of before the Enlightenment, it's kind of like liberalism wanted to replace Christendom. It was because if you look at Christendom had the idea of bringing all things. Christendom just means kingdom of Christ, all right, which means or dominion of Christ. Exactly. So what happened? What liberalism wanted to do was create another universalizing force, like what Dylan said, to just replace that. And now everybody else must conform to this idea. You know what I mean? So it's all trying to bring things under one umbrella. It's trying to build it is a form of idolatry where they're trying to build a new, let's just use the word straight out, another new world order based on these liberal values, and essentially create another Tower of Babel, another some sort of thing to replace it's in direct opposition to what the idea of dominion of Christ, Christendom, was. That's essentially what it is. It is the overthrowing of the natural order of things and the turning everything upside down on its head. And I'm sorry, you can see it you can tangibly see it. You can't deny that is the order, and that is the order they want to create. And it is the more opposing it is to the traditional view, the better. That's the way it must go, and the more they force people, the better. So there is just no doubt that it is a force to overthrow the dominion of Christ or Christendom, which had existed for centuries.
Yeah. Amen to that.
The Jimmies got so rustled that they had to go and try and overthrow God. Wow, that's some severe Jimmy rustling right there.
No, well, that's the thing. I mean, if you look at the things that they try to bring out, everything it has to be. It can't just take the good of it. It's got to take everything that old Dominion stood for and turn it on its inside out, upside down, on its head, and invert it completely. Then that's good.
Yeah,
That's cultural Marxism.
Well, turn everything upside down on its head.
Well, it did become that. It's exactly what it became. Because that's cultural Marxism.
Yeah.
Critical theory, pathologizing the past and the traditional way of things as a sickness that needs to be cured.
Yeah.
Well, if you remove the person's past, they have no future. So, or if you if, like Russell says, if you
pathologize
is the past, you won't have any future. It's a fact.
Well, you'll just be ripe for takeover and reorder and re-education.
You'll be ready for re-education. It's exactly what will happen.
So you need the gulag, yeah.
But the cultural gulag,
the
cultural and ideological. These days we don't need literal gulags anymore.
Nah.
They're not necessary. We just have cultural ones.
It's the gulag of ideas.
Yep, totally.
The gulag of ideas. I'm gonna make a T-shirt and say we live in a world of gulag of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
A brilliant one.
It certainly looks that way, yeah.
Because all the liberals and stuff, they're all also big into their battle of ideas and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, this we know. But look, I don't think they're equipped. I don't think they're equipped to fight the battle of ideas, to be honest. Definitely not libertarians. We know this.
And also your contradictory Christian liberals and stuff, they're just as bad.
Oh no! Don't talk to me about the Christian Marxists.
Oh, that's exactly what a Christian liberal is a Christian Marxist, essentially, in a nutshell.
I don't even know if that's actually even possible, but it's a complete oxymoron. But it just seems weird, man.
Yeah, your Codringtons and
God, look at it. I've seen a couple of guys on Facebook sprouting all these things, and I go, guys, this looks absolutely. You should actually see yourselves. It looks ridiculous.
Graham Codrington, purveyor of fake news. Codrington.
Yeah, that guy. Oh, wait, get him on the show. Let's have him on the show. Let's grill him.
Get Graham Codrington to peddle his Marxism, his Christian Marxism.
It's a pity Walter Pike died as well. We could have got him on as well.
Yeah. Anyway, before I say anything bad, let's move on to. I guess we've made our closing remarks. Hey, Dylan, you got something else to add?
Nah, man, I'm good.
So I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Remember to subscribe, like, share, guys. Please share. Please subscribe. Hang on, before we go, I want to do something quickly. Let's see, where am I now? Gosh, where's my other? Oh, there it is. Hang on. Let me just do this here quickly, guys, while I've got the oaks here. I want to check. Where are we? Community. Is it? I want to give oh gosh, I can't do it now. I want to give a shout out to some of our new subscribers. 6 Foot Scream, Nicholas van Wyk, Christoph, our friend Christoph Smuts. He's actually been with us for quite a while and stuff. He's the official, I guess, the general of memes for the ZACP.
Meme in chief.
Yeah, meme in chief. Yeah, so he's the guy. But there's quite a few new subscribers, guys. Thank you so much to all our subscribers out there. We really, really do appreciate those subs. Remember to share our videos with your friends and families. And everyone that you think would enjoy our content. Thank you so much, guys. Stay reactionary out there, because
God wills it.